Today we're talking about Michigan State's 28-39 loss to Washington. There's a lot being said right now about this loss. I'm going to come out right now and say that I think people are blowing it a little bit out of proportion. For Michigan State, yeah, it was an ugly loss. There are things we're going to talk about in this game, things that I think Spartan fans should be worried about. But credit to Washington. They came out and really dominated in this game. Michigan State never had a lead over the course of this contest. And that is really impressive for a Washington team who has a first-year head coach with the program. Kalen DeBoer is a very good head coach. Came over from after having a couple years at Ferris State. He is off to a great start for Washington. And people want to discredit this win for Washington a little bit. You know, they want to blow it out of proportion for Michigan State and what it means for them. But they also want to say, you know, that Washington needs to calm down and that it's ridiculous for them to storm the field. But listen, they were a 4-win team last year. And this was their new head coach, Kalen DeBoer's first real test for Washington. So a lot of credits to them. Washington was a 3-point favorite in this game, but Michigan State was still the 11th ranked team in the country heading into this contest. And Washington dominated. It wasn't a fluke win. They really dominated in this game. So credits to Washington for winning. And as for Michigan State, I don't think that this is everything, okay? Like Michigan State, we haven't even gotten into conference play yet. Clearly, this is a much improved Washington team, and it also seems pretty obvious that the issues that plagued Michigan State last year still remain. But they didn't lose a lot of games last year. They went 11-2 last season. Their pass defense is atrocious. Michigan State last season was 130th out of 130 teams for opposing passing yards per game. 130th out of 130. That is literally as worse as you can get. It doesn't get worse than that. So far through this season, they're 92nd, which is still really bad considering they played two cupcake teams. And Washington is not the best passing team they're going to play this season. I'm going to talk about Washington more in a minute, but they've still got to play Ohio State and what should be a very good Michigan passing game and so on and so forth. Like, this is not the best passing offense Michigan State's going to play this year. So to look as inept as they did in the secondary is really concerning for them. And it's a systemic issue. You know, you could even go back to Mel Tucker's lone season at Colorado in 2019. Colorado in 2019 was 120th out of 130 teams in terms of opponent passing yards per game. They're not defending the pass well, and they didn't do it last year. It doesn't look like they're going to do any better this year. They hit the transfer portal. That's kind of been Mel Tucker's thing so far at Michigan State, bringing in guys like Amir Speed and Jaden Mangum. And they don't have a terrible defense. Their secondary was getting absolutely picked apart. Chester Kimbrough was not playing well enough. And despite the fact that they've been recruiting young guys and they hit the transfer portal to try and address the situation, their pass defense is still pretty terrible. On top of that, you know, a lot of people want to blame Michigan State defensive coordinator Scotty Hazelton. And I understand that. He's been there since 2020. Pass defense is atrocious. It was atrocious last year against Ohio State when they lost by 50. They gave up a lot through the air to Michigan, but were able to win the game. Gave up a lot to Purdue last year and lost that game. That was their first loss of the season. But there's blame to be had for Mel Tucker as well. He needs to figure out what he needs to do to address this porous secondary. Because it's going to be a long season. But it wasn't only their secondary that's the problem, right? That's not the only reason they lost the game. It's the main reason they lost the game. But their offensive line played very poorly. Very poorly. Michigan State had 29 carries for 42 yards. And they did manage to have a rushing touchdown in the game. That's good for 1.4 yards per carry. Washington certainly played well defensively. But again, you're going to be playing good run defenses this season. 1.4 yards per carry. We knew last year that when Kenneth Walker wasn't having a big game on the ground, their offense struggled. That was the case in this contest. Peyton Thorne has started quite a few games for Michigan State now in his tenure there, but he's not able to put the offense on his back very often. He did actually play a pretty good game, and I'm going to talk about that as one of my positives for Michigan State here. But their passing game is not able to carry them without their run game, and their run game was atrocious. They had 0 sacks in this contest as well. So part of that falls onto the secondary, where your secondary needs to help out your defensive front to help them get to the quarterback. But no sacks. Michael Penix Jr. diced up your secondary and you couldn't run the ball. So overall, that is a lot of red flags where You're trying to prove people wrong again that you can be more than a 7 or 8 win team. But right now, that's going to be difficult with some of the issues we saw in this game. But there was a positive or two from this, and one being Peyton Thorne had some really nice moments, despite being without his number one wide receiver. And Keon Coleman stepped up in a big way to fill that void. So that was big for them. And overall, the team continued to fight over the course of this game. They were down 9-0 after the first quarter, and at the end of the first half, they were down 29-8. But they did outscore Washington 20-10 in the second half to close up the game to be within 11 points. But overall, Michigan State just played a pretty bad game. But again, good for Washington. You know, even in that first quarter when they were driving down the field, they weren't able to push the ball into the end zone, 4th and goal. They were still able to get a safety on Michigan State. And I mean, really, they kind of dominated all areas of the game. They were able to run better than Michigan State. Michael Penix Jr. threw for almost 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in this contest. They didn't make anything easy on MSU. So this was a really good win for Washington. And Kalen DeBoer gets pretty much a statement win in only his 3rd game at Washington. And they've struggled a little bit lately, so good for the Huskies winning this game. But as I said, I'm not going to blow this too much out of proportion. I don't think that this means Michigan State is bad or Mel Tucker is a bad coach. I don't think that Washington should be considered, a favorite for the Pac-12 or anything. But the thing with Michigan State to take away from this is that there are still issues that were plaguing them last year here now, except we saw more problems from in this game. And I think people were holding in some resentment for MSU. I think they were waiting to be able to dog Michigan State a little bit. This was an opportunity for MSU to prove a lot of people wrong and to show that they're one of the big dogs in the Big Ten, and they weren't able to capitalize on that moment. But when you have the whole Tuck coming thing for the last year, and that's all people hear when you talk to a Michigan State fan is Tuck coming, and then you give him almost $100 million after his second season, I think that people were really waiting to drop some hate on Michigan State. But it's still a long season. They're just now getting into Big Ten play. I'm watching out for this Minnesota game they have coming. Because if they lose at home to Minnesota, the walls are going to start coming down. You can't go 2-2 to start the year with wins over 2 cupcakes and losing to the 2 programs with a heartbeat that you've played. So that's not going to be good for Michigan State if they lose that game. So I'm definitely keeping an eye out on that. And again, Washington with a big win. But let's see if they can build on that momentum. They've got Stanford at home, which is a very winnable game. So keep an eye out for that and see if they get upset at home after having a big win at home against Michigan State. But thank you for listening, everybody. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Helps me grow out my channel. Keep an eye out for more videos coming out in the future where I break down some of my favorite games that have been played over the course of the season and games that we have coming up.